of mine. You found someone new, but I can't change my love the way that you do.
This is the story of a lost neighborhood and of its people who did not want to go.
I don't want no money. I want my home. The old man is old. See how the old man is old? No more. That's enough. I don't want to get out. I said to my two daughters, they don't want to get out too because they spend a lot of money. Plenty of money they spend in this place. Do not get nice to nobody. Never.
Hi, welcome to the West End Video Newsletter. Tonight I have on my show for reprise is Ray Flynn. Ray's always welcome here because as mayor, he was very helpful to us. He always did what was right. He, if I remember right, you told us one time, I can't bring the West End back, but at least I can give you a little bit of satisfaction. And he was the only mayor that ever went out of his way to help us, and for that, I'll be eternally grateful. As a matter of fact, I look upon him as a West Ender because the neighborhood he came out of, South Boston, was very similar to the West End, and the attitude of Ray as a mayor was more like a West End guy or a South Boston guy. A lot of these mayors that come out of what I call the suburban parts of Boston, like Hyde Park and Jamaica Plain, they have a whole different idea of what the city should be.
We had a struggle. We really had to survive.
That's
Just
right.
walking to school, you had to survive.
That's right. So that's why I look upon Ray as really a good guy, because not only did he do what he thought was right for us, okay, he was also like, we're also like kindred spirits because, you know, we sort of grew up in sort of the same. Southie's very close neighborhood, as everybody knows. Of course, it's changing now,
Yeah.
but the West End was a very close neighborhood too, and you had those same kind of ties between people, you know, your next door neighbors and everybody.
I think if I were ever running for office
Yeah.
and I were to run in a neighborhood that I thought would have been the best neighborhood in terms of support,
Yeah.
I would put the West End in that kind of ideal neighborhood
Right.
where it was a working class community,
Mm-hmm.
people working hard, all mixture of people. It used to be Irish, of course, as
Right.
you well know,
Right.
way back. Nellie Jackman
Jackman,
used to
right.
tell me all those stories. My dear friend, her son, of course, was Roger,
Roger, yeah.
who used to be the tower boy at the Boston Garden
Exactly,
for
yeah.
the Boston Celtics. And then, of course, I used to play ball up at Blossom Street, the old West End house.
Yeah.
That was one of my major mistakes in my life. I scored too many points this one game. I think I got 76 points.
Wow.
And 76 points, and I get chased out of the West End house. And as a matter of fact, I was over to get my visa the other day,
Yeah.
because I go back and forth to Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife was with me, and I said, "This is Charles Station." I says, "Boy, do I remember Charles Station." I ran out of the West End house, down to Charles Station, leaped over the turnstile. Luckily, the train was there. Got on the train, back to Southie we went.
It's strange because Tony Lavolo watched one of the shows and he heard you talking about that. He says, "You know, that happened to us in Southie."
Well, we talked about that was the difference in Southie.
He says, "I remember running out."
But I mean, think
That was
about it.
it. Yeah, that was
think
those
about it.
days. Yeah.
Your introduction,
Yeah.
Jimmy, is
Yeah.
is precise.
Yeah.
It's South Boston, the West End.
Yeah.
You know, there were neighborhoods. Of course, there were neighborhoods, but
And they were very productive in it.
yeah, it was home though, wasn't
Yeah,
it? Huh?
right.
You knew everybody.
Mhm.
You know, the lady up the street was Albanian. The lady across the street was Polish or
Right.
Lithuanian. And you know, the funny part about it, I still think about it. If somebody down the street, you know, the wife was having a baby, or the father got laid off, or one of the Crowleys down the street the father got killed in the Second World War. I remember my mother used to do the cooking, you know, for the family on Sundays and bring the big boiled dinner down to the
Right.
to the Crowleys, and the lady, Mrs. Kelly and Mrs. Germano used to make the pasta on Wednesdays. And, you know, so this is what the neighborhood is all about.
Yeah, neighborhoods had a whole different connotation in those days. Now people talk about a neighborhood, and they talk like, you know, they think if they talk to their neighborhood, I mean to the neighbor, if they say hi to their neighbor, and you know, or go to an activist meeting once a month or something, that they're a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And they don't understand.
You know, Jim, I go down to the Boston Athletic Club.
Right.
And I work out there every day, and I also have my grandchildren. I take them around Castle Island. Sometimes I'll walk like 3 hours, you know, when I have time, because I still like to exercise. But it's amazing, old timers will come up to me and say, Ray, I used to play ball with you. I played for Brighton. I played for Randolph. A couple of people would say, you know, I played ball for the West End House. It's amazing how, you know, you think this was like 3 months ago, the memory that people have of their youth growing up in the neighborhoods in which, you know, if these neighborhoods like the West End, if it was so bad as city government said it was, that they had to tear it down, well, why are we still talking about it, you know, 60 years later?
That's right.
You know, we talk about the West End, and I talk about my old South Boston community as if it was last year.
That's right.
You know, so these memories were, the neighborhoods must have been good because we still have a fond memory of them.
That's because we all had a common ideal. Okay, we all thought the same way. Well, just to give you an example, in the old days, like the stand-up guy, those old Mr. Lucky movies, right? That was probably the ideal. A man would not start trouble with anybody, but if anybody started trouble with him,
you could take care of them.
he would immediately respond. You know what I mean? It was, you weren't a bully, but you know, you didn't take any guff from anybody.
And the churches too. At that
too?
time, St. Joseph's, was that your parish?
That's right.
Was there another Catholic church down there?
There was. It was the Polish church. I forgot, the Lady of something or other.
And then there was a synagogue too, right?
Oh, there was about 5 synagogues. Yeah,
Yeah.
there was the Chambers Street one. I forgot the actual Jewish name. Then there was the North Russell Street Show synagogue. Then the one up the hill, which the Vilna Show, which originally was on
Which
Roll
they
Street.
moved it, didn't they?
Way back in 1920, they went
Yeah.
from a little storefront. They had a tiny storefront, and they went and they built this building, which is now what they.
Now, where would those Jews be
cultural
from?
center.
Would they be Russian Jews, or would they be Eastern
They were
European?
Lithuanian.
Lithuanian
Yeah, the
Jews.
Vilna Show was Lithuanian Jews, and they moved up there.
And then you had blacks, because L.D. Moore was a guy that I played ball with for the West
I
End
grew up
House.
in Lake. Sonny Moore was a real close friend of mine. As a matter of fact, in here, if you look.
I read the West End, the West End all the time.
Right here. I gotta look where the obituaries are.
I got to go to one of those reunions. What's the next reunion coming up?
I don't know when they're gonna have the next one, but that's the black kid. I grew up with him, Rico Warren.
Yeah.
Rico was a real nice. He was funny as anything. He was, you know, you're always laughing. He was
I
a great kid.
was reading in the paper the other day in the obituaries, a fellow that I grew up with in South Boston, he passed away, and it was Larry Blackamore. He was a black kid.
Okay.
He lived down the D Street housing project, he and his brother, 2 great athletes. But, you know, like during the busing, you know, they say, well, we've got to
world
integrate
changed,
the community because, you know, we have to bring blacks. There were blacks already in the community, down the Boys Club and so forth. I tell you, between the busing and dismantling the West End, boy, you talk about disrupting neighborhoods.
You know what I remember about South Boston? A friend of mine was in the Army, and when he came back, he was in the Army. He had some of his friends were from Celtic. So we used to go down there and, you know, we'd drink, and then they'd come over and drink, you know, in our bars. You know what I mean?
They don't have any bars in South Boston. What are you talking about?
Anyways, I used to go down there, and if somebody would say something, you know, they called somebody, you know, a black guy a name, right? Not a black guy, but like, and someone would always say, and inadvertently would always say, look, at those people are treated tough, you know what I mean? You know, I guess they equated that with, you know, more or less with like what was happening in Northern Ireland too, you know?
You know, people can give you a racial insult, and you know if they're your friend, or an ethnic insult. You know that if they're your friend, it rolls off your back, even if they're mad at you. It's when people ignore you or disrespect you and don't say, you know, they're too sophisticated to say it, but nevertheless you know how elitist and you know, how they are. You know, and I always say that class discrimination hurts just as much as racial discrimination.
Look, a lot of what was called racial discrimination was class discrimination. I was watching a thing on television where there was a black girl. It was called I forgot exactly the name of the show. It was on Channel 2, and the girl was a black girl, and she says, my grandmother wouldn't let us go near the white trash because she said you can't stay around them.
Yeah.
So look, there's, you know, what happens is class discrimination is probably the biggest thing if you think somebody's not as good as you, no matter if they're white,
Yeah.
black, yellow, green, then it's...
They both hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, they both hurt, and that's one thing we had. We never saw it growing up. I mean, we'd play the West End, we'd play Roxbury Boys Club with Roscoe Baker and Mel King and all these South End Boys Club.
Yeah,
I mean,
South
there were black kids, there were Syrian kids, a lot of Syrian kids, a lot of Jewish kids, a lot of Irish kids, Polish kids. You know, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered is you look up in the scoreboard at the end of the game, who won the game, who got the most points.
Getting back to the thing I was talking about in South Boston when we used to go down there, and when people would say anything, after busing, you didn't hear any of that.
Yeah.
There was nobody sticking up for black people anymore. It was like, you know, it was like they washed that right out. Busing sort of washed that right out of Southie.
You know, the thing about the whole thing about the busing, you know, I think most people would have said, well, if this is going to improve public education for all the kids, would say, okay, it's an inevitability, let's accept it. But people right from the outset, right at the very beginning, were saying this is not going to do anything to improve education for poor white kids or poor black kids. And as a result of that, they just resented outsiders, elitists from the outside, telling them what was best for their children, whether it be poor whites or poor blacks.
Well, what it did was level the education to everybody got a terrible education. Yeah. I mean, that's what it did, basically.
I mean, look what it did to the population of the city, Jim.
Yeah.
One, we're talking about churches and synagogues and mosques and so forth. I'll tell you, I don't know whether or not too many people agree with me, but on this issue, it's amazing to me what is happening in Boston. The parochial schools are closing. The Catholic schools churches are closing. I mean, these were once the centers of activity, cultural, recreation, you know, CYO, AA meetings, community meetings. And, you know, they're closing down. And, you know, everybody say, well, we just don't have enough priests to go around. Well, that's true, of course. But the real reason, Jim, is because of the fact that a lot of people in our day would be going to church regularly and supporting the church regularly. Now, that is not the case. When I was a kid growing up, we had almost 50,000 people going to church every Sunday in South Boston. 50,000. There were 8 churches. Do you know today we have less than 3,000 people going to church on the weekend, total, in South Boston? I mean, how do you keep a church, how do you maintain 7 churches with so few people?
Yeah, my feeling about the churches is, I know they probably have to close them, okay, and that's not where I want to fault them. As a matter of fact, I think I wrote a thing in one of my West Enders. I think that they should, because the diocese, the neighborhoods, gave the money to the diocese, and they should decide what's going to happen with it. Let the neighborhoods decide what's going to happen with the churches, the surplus churches and everything, and rather than the archdiocese deciding
the
that
Chancery or Lake Street. I agree, but I agree with that. And I also, Jim, just to amend that a bit, I hope the decision whether you have to close a church or a school is not just based on social and economic factors, although that's a big issue, obviously.
True.
But also take into consideration the impact that the closing of the school and the church will have on working class families and the community, Catholic as well as non-Catholic. Now, when I was mayor of Boston, I would go over to places like St. Patrick's in Roxbury, and everybody, and I used to love to walk in and out of that church, and that parish, and that school hall. Every kid in the place was black, but they all had their uniforms on, mostly young women. They all had their uniforms on. They were well disciplined. They were learning. They were going on to college. They were getting a good opportunity. Then the school closes down, and I says, you know, does anybody care anymore? I was in Italy. I was living in Italy at the time, and I heard that a lot of these schools were closing down. And I said, I read the paper, and not a voice of protest coming from city government or anywhere in the business community even.
Yeah. No, it's a shame because the destruction of a church or a parish or whatever you want to call it has a detrimental effect on the rest of that neighborhood, because all those people spent all those years, their families like put their nickels together,
Sure.
and it just devastates them.
You know, I remember my father was
The
a
thing
doctor.
that keeps, a lot of the things that keeps the West End together is we still have St. Joseph's. We had Father Buck, who has since
Father
died.
Buck, and then you had
And
Father
Troy.
Powers.
We have Father Troy now, and he's a real great guy. And we West Enders go back to the church all the time, and he appreciates it because we help the church out and everything. But it's still a mainstay, even though we don't have a neighborhood. Okay, it's still a mainstay of our
The old
neighborhood.
West Enders still go back to St. Joe's?
Every year they have a West End Mass for deceased West Enders, and we come down, everybody goes down there. Matter of fact, your son came one time.
Yeah.
And it was, a matter of fact, talking to Elizabeth Moore, her name is Johnson now. Her real name was, that's Eldie's sister.
Really?
Yeah, she came to the Mass.
Were they
and she-
Catholic?
No, they were, I don't know, Episcopalian or
Yeah.
something. But she comes.
My
and-
son, by the way, is going to be going over to the Persian Gulf again.
Again.
Yeah, so this is his third active,
Oh,
but he
okay.
volunteers for, assignment. He'll
Yeah.
be going to Bahrain,
Yeah.
I think around the 15th or 17th of January.
Okay,
He's
yeah.
in the career
Hope-
military.
Right, I hope he comes back safe.
Yeah,
He's
he's
a nice kid. I've had him on the show, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His wife is having their second baby,
Ah.
but he's a very patriotic kid. He really
Yeah, he
believes
seems to
that
be.
this is, and he's a
Seems to be.
writer, so he,
Yeah.
he does a lot of the writing for the Navy while he's
Yeah.
on active duty.
Yeah, I like him. He's a good kid.
He's
Very
so.
good kid.
I don't know where the patriotism comes from. I guess
Well, that's he grew
all
up.
of us are that
Yeah.
grew up that way, but I'm
know.
proud of the fact that he
Right.
feels that way.
Like I lost a brother in Italy in the Second World War. And,
Where in Anzio?
No, he was
Sicily?
He went through. He died in October '44. He was.
Gee, almost right at the end of the war.
Yeah, and what
Right before
strange-
the liberation of Rome.
Yeah, well, it was after that. Yeah.
Was it after that?
Yeah, it was up in the Po Valley. It was up in the.
Oh, that's right.
northern-
The liberation was in June.
Yeah, so they were coming back into the lines. They were pulling back for winter, and some
who was
guy
up there
stepped
was
on a
Bob
mine.
Dole.
Was that right?
Bob
Oh, that's
Dole
right.
was
He was-
up there.
Yeah, but he was in the
Mountain Division.
Mountain Division. My brother was in the 88th Infantry, and
I was reading in the West End at the one time, is it true? You tell me, but I was very concerned about it. When they tore down some of the places, the hero squares of kids from the West
All gone.
End, all gone.
all gone.
They never, the city should replace those
I talked to
those
them.
signs.
I talked to them, and they said, "Well, we could come up with a memorial, but you'll have to raise the money for it." And you'll
That's
have to, they went
nonsense.
into this
I mean,
whole.
the kids from the neighborhood of the
Yeah.
West End in Boston gave their life
Right.
up to our country. They had the community honored them.
That's right.
Then they tore these buildings down, and the city didn't even put these signs back up.
Matter of fact, she died now, but Mary Mahegan, Peter's mother.
Yeah.
They were from the West End. Peter wasn't because they moved out afterwards. But Mary's family they were the organists for St. Joseph's.
No kidding.
Yeah, and she.
They had a business in South Boston, like an electrical appliance business.
And
Peter the Mahegans.
she was living in Cambridge just before she died. And she sent me in a letter. After I wrote that thing about she says, "Is there no end to what these people will do?"
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, she's a very fine person. She was a fine lady. She
I didn't know that they were originally from. They have one of the other Peter's brother writes, I think, for the parades,
Globe, yeah.
For the Globe is
That's right.
John.
Yeah. I forgot his name.
Yeah.
But
Quite a family, a wonderful family.
But yeah, Mary was a sweetheart. I really got to say that Peter should be proud that. I mean, she was a real nice lady. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's best compliment I can give her.
I didn't want to get you off the track,
Yeah.
but when we were talking about the military, that article that you wrote there really stood out in my mind. I mean, that's the least we could do for them.
Well, hopefully we have the museum now. Once we get it moving, okay. Right now we're trying to dig up money for it. Once we can get it moving, I think that's one of the
What
prime
kind
things.
of memorabilia, artifacts? Do you have a lot
Well,
of
we
that?
have pictures and everything. The Bostonian Society had an exhibit they did on the West End in 1992, I think.
Yeah.
And we have that created in there. As soon as we can get enough money, we'll uncreate it and have it put back together. So we'll have that as an exhibit. We talked about different exhibits. Sometime, like those BRA models.
Yeah.
That they put of like the
replica of the old West End.
Replica of the old West End.
That'd be great.
In a like one of those architectural type models. But that's all.
You have a lot of distinguished people originally from the West End. I know that fellow who's a lawyer, I think, in Somerville.
Oh, Privateer, yeah.
He's a big supporter of
He's a big supporter,
of
right.
the West End.
Then we have Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah.
He's
haven't seen him on TV. Is he still on TV?
Well, he's past. He does mostly, from what I can see. I don't know exactly what's happening with his career, but he mostly he narrates like different things.
I was looking at.
I mean, he's older than I am, so leading man roles, I guess, are probably decreasing.
I'm working with a fellow named Tony Marinozzi out of Cleveland, Ohio, and we're doing a screenplay for my book.
Oh, beautiful.
The Accidental Pope. And I was thinking in my own mind what would be a good location, around Boston, to do the. And I remember reading some old screenplays just to get a flavor how they were doing. And I came across at the library, the public library, a fellow named Levine.
Oh, Frank?
Joseph Levine.
Oh, Joe Levine. Yeah, Joe Levine was a producer. He owned a company. He started. You remember all those Samson and Goliath type movies and everything?
He produced all those?
Yeah, he made a ton of money.
Original West Ender, right?
Yeah, he lived on what's that street? They tore it down. It was there right up until they tore down the Manger Hotel and put in the Tip O'Neill building. Billerica Street.
Billerica Street.
He lived on Billerica Street. Matter of fact, they did a piece on 60 Minutes on him, and he had.
Is that right?
He got the sign from Billerica Street. It was on his desk.
That's where the Sansons lived, right down around that way.
Down around. They had their bar and establishment over there. Yeah, that's right.
Which is where the big building is out. I think the Mass Catholic Conference has their. Do they have their office there now?
I think the Mass Catholic Conference has their office in West End Place, across from the. Yeah.
You have to go around the side.
See right here?
Yeah.
Well, right next to it is, I think, a couple medical offices, and then right next to the medical offices is the Catholic Conference.
You won't be able to get there in August with the Democratic National Convention.
Well, we're hoping that it doesn't mess us up too bad.
Yeah.
We're right across from the. You're welcome to come down and use my office if you aren't ready.
Yeah, they probably won't let me near the Democratic National Convention.
Anyways, this is why I originally called you, and I think it's an interesting point. You said that the Democrats are ignoring Catholics.
Democratic candidates for president.
Right,
really
and I believe that.
Particularly on issues that were important to working class families, such as the West End and South Boston that we were talking about. Blue collar families. The issue that really bothers me. If you have a lot of money, you can send your kids to fancy private schools.
Exactly.
If you don't have a lot of money and you don't want the kids to go to public school, the public school may not be meeting the needs of the community. You should be able to send your child to a parochial school, a Catholic school. A lot of these families can't afford the extraordinary high cost of taxes, the high cost of living, and then still pay the tuitions. Yeah. Why can't the government give these families a little voucher, a little break? And that's what I'm trying to get the Democratic candidates for president to talk about, those kind of issues that are important to working class Catholic families.
I'll tell you,
they won't.
My kids went to Matignon, and
which is a good school.
Yeah, which my last year my son was there, which is it's got to be 12 years ago, or 10 years ago anyway. He was paying $3,500 a year. And between paying tuition for my daughter and paying in college and paying tuition, it was extremely hard.
Yeah,
extremely hard.
You're going to do it. But why? And you were getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, right, to do your job. But so you can give all these tax breaks to all these billionaires and these multimillionaires. Yeah. Why can't you give a little tax credit for a working class family, middle class family to get a little credit for financial support for sending their kids to Matignon?
If you spend $3,500 a year to send your kid to something, now it's about $5,000, I believe. If you're going to spend $5,000 a year to send your kid to a Catholic school, at least give yourself at least like a $2,500 break, something.
But you can't even get these guys to even talk about it. And it's not just that. That's just one issue, Jim. But there are a whole series of other issues as well.
Oh, I agree. Well, the problem is see, Catholics, they don't look at Catholics like a group. Sort of like the blacks before 1960. Blacks were in a lot of different organizations, but they weren't perceived as talking with one voice. As long as they don't think we're talking with one voice.
That's true. Hey, to the credit, to the blacks' credit.
Oh, no, I'm not.
They're speaking with one voice now, and they vote as a bloc. and that's good. And Jewish people vote as a bloc. Liberals vote as a
Feminists,
bloc.
yeah. Whichever group-
Evangelical conservatives vote as a bloc. Feminists vote as a bloc. Again, all power to them. Why is it that 65 million Catholics in this country are all over the lot?
What happens is the press takes the leadership's voice
Only,
as speaking for
only
the
listens to them.
as speaking to the for the whole. Okay, and they don't do that with the Catholics. Okay, Catholics they just don't believe that.
And it's not just
we
the
have a voice.
candidates,
Yeah.
Jim, it's the press also.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, like I would talk at an event, and there'd be a reporter there, and the reporter would see that I get a good response when I make this point about, you know, parents of children who want to send their kids to parochial school. And one time, there were 700 people, and everybody stood up and applauded. You know what? The Globe wouldn't print one single word in the paper. So it looks like there's no support out there for this kind of proposal, where in fact there's a lot of support out there coming from not only the silent majority, they don't want to be silent, it's just that the press won't quote them.
Well, that's why I had my own newsletter.
Yeah.
That's when I started the newsletter and I started a TV show, because I realized if you don't have a voice, nobody listens to you. Okay, and it depends on if you attack an institution, right? They all bandy together. It doesn't matter which institution it is. They all bandy together.
Oh yeah,
The power elite moves together because
pack mentality.
Yeah.
You know, it's like on a Sunday morning shows. This always got me. You get 5 or 6 reporters, none of them whom are from Boston. They've only lived in this city for 3 years, and they're coming on the program and they're going to recap, you know, the news of the week, which is fine. But then to do that, they have no institutional memory of what it was like.
That's
I mean, if you
exactly what I
make
was gonna say.
anybody on television today could be talking about the old West End and how applicable those lessons of years ago is, in fact, to today. What's happening to the West End, Jim, is happening to South Boston today.
Right, I agree. That's another thing that I was talking about. The Southie is changing radically.
It's gentrified. And instead of tearing the houses down like they did in the West End, they're converting them to $500,000 condominiums.
You're right.
What's the difference? Working class families still can't live there.
Peter Gilzinnis called me about 10 years ago, and he was talking about Franpere. He says, "What do you think will happen if Franpere goes up?" I said, "They'll probably gentrify South Boston out. It'll be gone in about 10 years." Well, Franpere didn't come. But
well, the only reason why Franpere didn't
gentrification came in from the back.
Yeah.
Your administration is the only administration I ever heard of across the country that ever gave an individual the Dudley Square Initiative.
Oh, the eminent domain.
And that's the only one I ever heard of, and I think
that was the first one in the country where the city actually gave the community property.
I don't think that's happened anywhere else.
You know what? And the funny part about it, the community lived up to their promises. They said, if you give us this property, we will build housing on those vacant lots, and there will be good housing and it'll be well maintained. Take a drive down there tonight, you'll find that Dudley Street Initiative are beautiful family housing down there.
Ray, it was great having you.
Good to be
we're
with you,
running
Jim.
out of time, and
We've only been here 2 minutes. What are you talking about?
see you at the next West End Video Newsletter.